send us questions and suggestions throughout. But how we're going to play this one is we've got some input from three speakers. I hope. I think we've got two. I'm thinking a third will be coming. And they're going to take us through a few ideas that their insights on performance management, and then we want to throw it open to the floor. So lots of input and sharing from you good people about what you've seen works and what doesn't work, how you're rethinking performance management, how you're approaching it. So it's a big welcome to Jen Lawrence and Tim Pointer, and I hope Kevin Moyes, our panel today. Jen's Chief People Officer at Tax Systems, Tim's Senior VP HR at Global Brands Group, and the Chair and Co-founder of the Business Culture Awards, which is heartily recommended to everyone on the call. And Kevin is Global HR Director at Save the Children. So we're going to hear from Jen, Tim, and Kevin in that order. And then, as I say, we'd like to hear from you. I'll finish at 11:45. So please put yourself on mute now if you would. Thank you very much. And Jen, over to you. And I think you've got a slide to share.
I have. Yeah, let's even a year on from all this stuff, I'm still twitchy and nervous whenever I start doing any presentation with teams. So maybe over time things get a bit better. I love the fact I can still present in my slippers. We were having a laugh about the moment where I might still find myself going to Sainsbury's or shopping, forgetting to take them off. But anyway, it's really nice to meet you all. And I am kicking off this session around performance management. And before I dive into some of my experiences I wanted to share today, I took myself back and had a quick look at performance management in general and kind of how we've ended up in this space with appraisals and performance management. And there's a really good couple of articles which I've put on the bottom of this presentation for you if you're interested in reading a bit more. Okay, they're a bit dated, but I still think they hold quite a lot of truth and helpfulness. Appraisals trace back to World War I, if you can believe that. And the system was originally identified to help identify poor performers who needed to be discharged. And I think it's fair to say that it was more about the issue at the time rather than thinking about improving performance. That was a bit of an afterthought. For those who've done their CIPD, you will remember quoting McGregor in some assignment or another, but that theory X and Y came out in the 50s and probably made another transition between performance management being much more about the here and now into talking about motivation, rewards and punishment for that X and Y theory. And that sort of came in quite fast into how managers thought about performance management. I think it then took a bit of a transition in the 70s, perhaps a little bit around inflation, about things changing in the world. And Jack Welch famously brought in this whole kind of hypo ABC, sort of A being high performers, B being kind of, you know, you accommodate them, C, you dismiss them. That forced distribution curve, which some of you may still live with, certainly was adopted really heavily in the 2000s by about 60% of companies. So then we sort of slid into the noughties era. And I think a bit of a shift happened around appraisals, again, around employees being more accountable. We thought about allocating rewards differently. And certainly, I think what started to fade in the last 5 to 10 years is this concept of annualization of appraisals on the grounds that I think there's probably a sort of cue the tech companies' influence here, particularly, you know, if you think about Adobe being one of the big companies at the time, but swiftly followed by Dell and Microsoft, who really went after this agile mindset. And actually, this whole piece around collaboration doesn't work with individual appraisals. Self-regulation was becoming the norm because we were doing hackathons and starting to do much more short term, but more, might I say, in the moment kind of feedback. And I think those sort of sprints that get talked about made people really think about actually how often we gave feedback. And I think it started to revolutionize how we thought about performance management. So a little slide up here for you in terms of numbers, because I think sometimes it's about context setting for this. But see if you can guess the number. So what percentage of managers don't see the value in appraisals as a context? Have a go at thinking of a number for that. What percentage of execs believe that it is an inefficient use of time to do annual performance? And how many tribunals do you think have been successfully defended as a result of consistently applying ratings into the decision-making process? And finally, what percentage agree that ongoing performance management conversations are more effective than an annual or kind of maybe twice a year type of review? So let's see how you did. So 45% of managers don't see the value in appraisals. Maybe a bit lower than you think, but I think genuinely a lot of managers talk about it not being as successful as it could be. Execs much higher, don't believe it's an effective use of time. I think there was a bit of a correlation of a study done, and about over 200 hours are spent by managers each year looking at the performance review and doing the whole process. So I can see why they probably thought that. No employee tribunals, to my knowledge, have been successfully defended as a result of consistent application of ratings. And a whopping 89% agree that ongoing performance management conversations are more effective than an annual process. And I think you'll see that in the flavour of what you're going to hear from Tim and Kevin as well. So I thought I'd just give you a bit of a summary of experience, because my kind of HR view on life is, you know, the best learnings come from failing, but also I think actually if I can share something that I've learned from the various companies I've worked for, I you know, and hopefully it will impart a bit of thinking for you guys, then I hope this is of help. So my first one is around getting buy-in. So because this is recorded, I can't tell you the companies, but I think you could probably hazard a guess of some well-known airline industry companies. And this one did a hackathon with about 60 managers and leaders, and we rethought performance management with them. And in fairness, I think hackathons are a great concept for engagement, but one of the things that we realised afterwards was we didn't have the leadership buy-in. So the ratings being a key sticking issue to remove, and so therefore it floundered a bit. Eventually, there was lots of thoughts. Do you go with one half of the company testing it and one half not? Eventually got deprioritized. So my learning here is experiment, trial stuff, but ensure the root cause is really understood from the start. Make sure the project's not too unwieldy, and what's really required to get fixed first, and get that real buy-in from the leadership from the start. My second one's from a premium chocolate company. So this was an example where we looked at ratings from a remuneration point of view, and we had a lot of 0 to 0 issues. And so in one year we really went for it, and we removed annual appraisals, we introduced calibration, we removed paperwork. We wanted to ditch actually the link between rewards and performance. And my learning here is it can all be a tad hasty, and you don't actually need to do it all at once. So what the big learning for us was about taking both employees as well as managers on the journey. And eventually we did actually detach ratings to salary benchmarking. But it took a hell of a lot of training and coaching for managers to get us there. And actually, you've just got to make sure that your culture can go on that journey with you at the pace that works for the culture, because it took a while to readily trust and absorb what we were trying to do. And, you know, but human nature being what it is, we like what we know, and it took a little shift in mindset to go with it. My third kind of bit of experience is do what's right for your company. And there's so many examples of companies out there just, you know, kind of showing all their good best practice. And it's really tempting to go, oh, we'll have a bit of that. So one of the FMCG companies I worked in used a forced distribution curve, probably because it was the flavour of the HR month. And we had some horrific stories. Whilst it was really good in the short term for great conversations and so forth, quite a lot of people felt labelled, and we had a really big backlash on performance management, where people were doing their best, but ultimately they were being downgraded in a rating because of the forced distribution. So in fairness, actually, they've moved away completely from ratings and distribution curves, which I think is the right thing to do. But if you have to have this stuff, try and keep it really simple. So even having a 9-box grid, I think, is quite complicated for employees to get their heads around. Try something really simple like stay, grow, step as an initiative can really help if you still want to have these kind of things in place. But don't be afraid to be bold. Just because you know, lots of other companies are doing it, don't necessarily think it's the thing you have to follow suit with. Employee experience, so the end-to-end journey. So again, going back to an airline industry example here, but we did a really nice piece of work around employee experience and mapping all those moments that matter and thinking about the flow of the process. So I think sometimes we can have HR processes disjointed, often because they're handled by different teams. So you'll have a reward team or a learning team, or we have a business partnering team. And I think if you walk the shoes of the employee, one of the great things you can do is then work out how to link things together. So whether it's career conversations, development, salary, and often the salary one is the elephant in the room for line managers to handle well. So I think there's something in there about how can you join up your processes to create one great big employee experience. In the FMCG example, we had 3+1. So actually trying to reduce the number of objectives to 3, but making one of them a development one was a good way of encouraging those links. But just before I move on, the other one I was going to say to you was around another example with linking employee experience along with customer experience. So again, in the airline industry, there's a score called an NPS, and that's called a Net Promoter Score, which they often use to determine how likely you are to fly with the company again. You might have been asked one of those if you've ever flown. One of the things that we did was we thought it was a great feedback opportunity for cabin crew to get feedback from their customers directly. So focusing on the conversation, entirely the point here. What we didn't foresee, though, was some of the flaws in some of that process. So the customers aren't always kind and fair, and some of this stuff was literally being fed through to our employees. So good learning for us here, because some of them are really inappropriate. So I don't know, you might we had a couple of comments. One of them was the person was too effeminate and gay, which clearly wasn't helpful at all. But additionally, the NPS score was a great indicator for how well the airline was performing, but it did vary by flight destination. So again, a learning for us is if you were tracking the Orlando holiday makers, funnily enough, they're a bit happier. So crew behaved differently and only wanted to really fly with the happy people going on holiday. And as a result of that, we noticed sickness changed as people chose not to fly on the maybe less happier NPS score routes. So the learning there is be really clear on feedback and behaviours you want to happen, and perhaps foresee some of the backlash if you are going to connect things like customer and employee experience together. Oh, and then my last one really was around from tax systems, which is where I am today. So we've done quite a lot of work already around line manager leaning on the end of year process a bit heavily. So we've tried to remove that, and through consulting with managers, 100% wanted to ditch the form, go online, 70% wanted us to remove ratings, and 75% want a clearer reward strategy. So our learning has been to create a real simple cyclical process, remove the 5-page kind of documentation that went around it that was perhaps getting in the way of those really good check-in meetings and ongoing conversations throughout the year. And look, we're having a go at removing ratings, partly because I think it's creating a problem between that and remuneration at the moment. But equally, I think nobody likes to be labelled, and I think it doesn't necessarily work particularly well in the culture that we have here. I haven't dictated the frequency of one-to-ones, but I've more encouraged and shared what good looks like. And we're using employee data through engagement surveys to assess how we're doing in that space. So I recognise there's quite a lot of changes that are happening in performance management, and perhaps some of the challenges that still exist are around this move to a more informal system requires a culture of continuous feedback. So challenges that I still think may be out there, which is why some of us are on the call today to grapple with, is aligning the goals. So certainly, if you're moving away from an annual process into quarterly, it's how do you ladder up the goals or objectives for individuals to still make sense. And the way we've tried to do that is still have an annual plan that says this is where we want to go as a company, but have more frequent, say, quarterly check-ins with the leadership team to say, right, what's the priorities for the quarter, and communicating that and making the objectives much more free-flowing through the year rather than something you do at the beginning of the year and you put it on the shelf. From a reward point of view, to use the word of Gavin and Stacey, it used to be nice and tidy. And I think some of the things we have a challenge around is when you detach salary and bonus, suddenly that creates a bit of ambiguity. Do we really trust our managers to be able to do that properly? And I think one of the challenges that I have around ratings actually is sometimes that exposed more of our favoritism in terms of ratings and revealing biases. So perhaps one of the things thinking about from a legal trouble point of view is how can you use your gender and ethnicity reporting to make sure that you are fairly treating your people in the reward space. And then when it comes to managing underperformers, it was always really handy to have that rating to say, hey, there's a problem in the camp here, let's sort this one out. And I think actually what I would encourage is for everyone to have a great development plan, because no matter where we are in our learning curve of life, everyone has the opportunity to improve and develop. And I think the shift into PIP is quite brutal still. So actually, by having really strong, good development plans and educating and developing our line managers and coaching them, we can certainly see a lot of performance management transitioning towards better conversations and really helping them to be more timely. So on that note, I will pass on to the next speaker and I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jen. That was great. Lots of lovely insights there, really useful, and a nice broad sweep. So let's turn to Tim now, if I may. And I think you've got your slide, and you're looking, amongst other things, at how the pandemic has perhaps changed things in your company and how performance is managed.
Absolutely. I'm just making a performance note to myself, actually, which says don't follow Jen, because that was absolutely exceptional. Right. Okay, I think I've got a couple of things to add, but that was, that was excellent. For those of us with secondary school children, you might recognise any twitch I develop halfway through if the doorbell rings, because the parcel from the COVID-19 home testing programme is due today between 9:31 a.m. and 1:31 p.m. So I might just have to throw it back to Richard halfway through, but that's the wonders of where we are at the moment, isn't it? So, okay, a quick screen share. There we go. Get everyone to look at themselves. And hopefully, and Richard, I can now. It's a wonderful thing where I can't see anyone anymore because I'm just doing a straightforward share. So, Richard, all good? All up on the sheet?
Yeah,
wonderful.
Thank you.
So, what you're looking at is. Really fits into exactly what Jen just described. So this is a very, very simple performance check-in worksheet. So I've been at Global Brands Group coming up to 3 years now. And when I first came into the business, we had a very standard annual appraisal process. And we had a lovely, clunky, great system in which perhaps about up to a top of maybe 5% of people actually had their objectives stated. So it just wasn't working, it wasn't engaging people, and it wasn't actually driving performance at all, exactly as Jen has outlined. So where we moved to is this much lighter touch performance check-in approach. Now, as you can see, this worksheet is based on our 4 company values, which are very, very simply keep evolving, be real, take care of one another, and build it. And you can see we've popped in some suggested questions, which are very much on the appreciative inquiry side of engaging with the team. And it's all about starting a two-way conversation with some nice open questions. It's not a gotcha exercise, which is how many people thought about the old style of annual appraisal. And also the key word is it was annual. So, once a year having that conversation, maybe if you were very lucky, you might have a check-in 6 months. Whereas this is much more organic. It might be every 4 weeks, it might be every 6 weeks. It's very much driven by what the team are working on at the time. So regular, smaller conversations and allowing that course correction in real time. Now, this was a massive cultural change for the business, because we had to move it from being an HR process, which is how everybody referred to the appraisal methodology, to being a business process. We had to help people consider what KPIs they'd want to bring into this conversation, how they would link it back to the purpose of the organisation, how they would bring in the team plan, the overall business strategy. So it was bringing a lot more to the behaviours and strengths or otherwise of the individual leaders. Now, what was interesting was at the same time as introducing these regular performance check-ins, we also introduced 2 other components across the business, which I think are worth mentioning at the same time. One was called Loop, And Loop was the opportunity via our global portal for any business improvement opportunities to be raised by colleagues right the way across the globe, and then be commented on by their peers, and then up-weighted, up-ranked according to the popularity of the ideas. Now, we're a global apparel and footwear business, so it might be about brands, it could be about design, it could be about logistics, it could be about influencers and social media. It was all on the table, down to margin and customer choices. But again, this was really changing the culture of the business and giving a voice to people regardless which division or which country that they were in, and we have colleagues in 35 countries around the world. At the same time, alongside Loop, we also introduced a Kudos, which is a peer-to-peer feedback, again via our global portal, which gives our colleagues the opportunity to thank one another in real time. And again, rather than just giving you a big old thumbs up, it's specifically saying this is the piece of work, or this is the insight, this is the help that you gave me. So that people are very specific in why they're being appreciated. So these three elements all came in at the same time, and it was a big cultural shift for us. The one other thing that we had to really work with managers is that outside of our retail store staff, who obviously in the UK at the moment are on furlough until the 12th of April, all of our colleagues are working from home. So it was also reminding our managers that they were having these conversations with people in their own home, and that family members may pass by. For those of you that joined at just before the hour, you would have heard me tell the story of my 13-year-old deciding to commando crawl across my office floor while I was having a rather sensitive conversation, because the door's there and the printer's there and she wanted to get to the printer and she didn't want to interrupt. This is normal. We now know one another's cats. We now know one another's children, and we have to be aware that all conversations we're having could well be overheard by someone's partner, someone's daughter, someone's father. And that's now part of the sensitivity that we're asking managers to bring into those performance conversations. And also at the same time, we launched an update to our approach to well-being. And we were reminding all of our leaders that, what is the situation with your colleague? Are they currently working on remote schooling at the same time as working in the business? Do they have care responsibilities? Are they going through grief? We all know that more people have died in the last year in the UK, for example, than in any year for the last 50 plus years. Do they have financial hardships because their partner has lost their job, for example? Are they living alone? Or are they to avoid living alone, or to avoid living in a shared accommodation, have they moved back home? And some of our managers, it was an absolute blank face. It was like, sorry, Tim, I'm supposed to know this about my team. Yes, you are. Okay. So it was quite a huge shift in terms of yes, I do expect you to know what's happening within your team and what their individual circumstances are, and this is the way that we can help you to move to that. So everything became much more real, much less corporate, and I would say more human in terms of the various conversations that we've introduced at the same time, with the whole performance check-in approach being at the heart of it. So that's everything that I wanted to say, and I look forward to the questions later on, and I will return the power to Richard.
Thank you very much, Tim. Excellent, very interesting. Some telling moments there about how the last year's changed as well, and how you manage performance. Kevin, over to you now. I think you've got a slide too, to share how you've been doing things that save the children. Kevin, welcome.
Great, thank you. I didn't realise I had to upload the slide myself, unfortunately.
No worries. Let's see if I can do it for you.
I've probably filed it away somewhere. It's very safe.
Bear with me a second. Oh, unless we can send the slide out afterwards.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I'll just go. Yeah, it's fine. So it's Save the Children. When I started in 2016, so we also had the typical approach to performance management that's been described already on the call. The feedback from employees, including from the employee engagement surveys, really showed that the performance management process was not meeting their needs in terms of how they felt about it, in terms of the impact that it had, in terms of the actual process, and not really focusing on the right areas for them. We also had performance-related pay in place, which was slightly unusual for an INGO, a non-profit organisation. And we noted through sort of analysis that there wasn't really a correlation between, there was always a correlation between those employees who were awarded higher pay increases versus the employees who we saw as our top talent in the organisation. We also felt that we wanted people to work for Save the Children because they're motivated by the service to children and by the mission of the organisation, and not motivated to deliver more because of an incentive of a pay increase. We also looked at various pieces of evidence, some suggesting that in some cases performance-related pay can be a demotivator in terms of performance, and also because of the complexity of the roles in the organisation. We felt that it's pretty impossible actually to distinguish an individual's contribution towards an outcome which has had many teams and many people working on it. So if I as a manager have a really fantastic year and deliver all of my goals, how can I justify having a pay increase knowing that without my team I wouldn't have achieved any of those goals? So that was the kind of mindset that we were in around the performance related pay. We also had performance ratings, standard performance ratings, and again we found we had a high number of people being awarded outstanding, and not many people being awarded the lower ratings. And we also had a lack of consistency in terms of how managers interpreted those ratings and the standards that they applied to them. And we also had a mountain of documents and guidance and everything else that you'd expect from a traditional system. So we did lots of work. We had focus groups with employees. We talked to different employee groups. We got lots of feedback. And we then made a decision to move to a new approach, which we called Develop to Perform. And we also went to pains not to call it a process, but to call it an approach, because we didn't want people to think of it as a process. And we also went to pains to emphasise the fact that this wasn't owned by HR. HR weren't going to police this and make sure people did it. The emphasis was on employees and managers to want to do this because they bought into the vision and the benefit of it, and they saw the value of it. So what the new system means is that in quarter 4, an employee sets their annual goals and quarterly deliverables for each of the quarters of the year. In quarter 2 and quarter 4, they collect 360 feedback from their colleagues. And at the end of every quarter, they have a coaching conversation with their manager, which the employee leads to review how they've done in that particular quarter. And we rolled out lots of training for employees and for managers around that. And we also trained managers in terms of how to have those coaching conversations, and for employees on how to be part of those coaching conversations and how to lead them. So within that discussion, the employee answers a number of questions. So they answer what's worked well in this quarter, what's not worked well yet, what's missing, and what's possible. And what's possible is that visionary piece in terms of what could you really achieve in this role if you had everything that you needed to get them into that forward-thinking mindset. And then after that conversation, the manager then answers a number of questions. So they answer, has the employee delivered what was agreed, yes or no? Have the deliverables been achieved in line with the employee's focus competencies in terms of our competency framework? So have they delivered in the right way? And has the employee demonstrated that they themselves have developed? So the employee will have role goals which focus on the content of their job, and they will also have development goals which focus on their own development. So we have no ratings, and we have no performance increases. We do have the ability to award exceptional pay increases where an employee has significantly developed within their role, and their pay then needs to be realigned to the full market rate for their role or against the internal equity for people who are at that same level of development within the organisation. The sort of overall philosophy is really that your reward for good performance, your reward for delivering well, it will be exciting opportunities, career progression with Save the Children, and obviously the service to children. And we linked this up also to our talent management approach in terms of making sure that was much more robust in terms of increasing the number of opportunities we were able to offer people to go on short-term assignments and other deployments. So we really kind of matched those two things together. When we implemented it or started to implement it, we had lots of resistance, especially around the removal of ratings. We also had resistance around the feedback not being anonymous, so there were issues around that. And also, again, the main sort of challenge was around consistency. As with all of these things, the success of it sits squarely on the shoulders of the people managers in terms of how well they go through this approach, how well they understand it, and ensuring the employees getting the most from it. So I'd say we're not kind of there yet. I think we've implemented it. We've got good feedback where it's working really well and it's having a positive impact on people. We're seeing our scores kind of increasing in terms of employee satisfaction around development and around performance management. But it is that consistency piece that we still need to crack in terms of making sure that it is used in a consistent way across the organisation.
Very good summary. And sorry about the late delivery of your slide there, as it were, Kevin. Thank you. That's excellent, and I love that summary. As always, the success of this sits squarely on the shoulders of the people managers. Spot on, I think. Now, we'd love to hear from you. So please raise your right hand, which is top right, as you know. Let me just stop presenting there. Apologies. We'd like to hear what do you think of what you've heard so far, questions and answers for the speakers, and at the same time, what do you do? What you've tried, what's worked, what's not worked so well. I think we're starting with Gareth. Thank you very much, Gareth, for starting us off.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks. That was really great, everyone. Kevin, it's just really interesting hearing yours because we've literally gone through the exact same process. We started off with an annualized reward-based process where employees would come with a lever arch file of evidence to prove why they demanded this amount of money, and we had consistency issues and everything like that, and it all became about one horrible end-of-year process where we had collaboration. We even had an appeals process as well, so it was horrible. We've now gone all the way through to exactly what you've done, Kevin, which is have a circular process. It's less about an annual appraisal. It's not about money. It's about development conversations, a two-way process. And all we're really having is light touches to actually ensure that managers are having those conversations. And we are struggling potentially with two of the same issues that you are, which are management taking responsibility. We still police it to a certain extent, and we still send out our completion ratings at the end of each month, and we send out our development plans completion at the end of each month, and they're getting better, but we still get pushback even though we have slimmed down that process and made it so much more light touch. And it comes back to, I think, what Jen was saying about a lot of our managers understand the benefit of the two-way conversation and the ongoing conversation, but they just hate any sort of time taken around a process and a structure to log it and do it. And that gets in the way of what they see as their day job. So I guess, and just as an aside, we also moved to a sort of discretionary pay process, exactly what you outlined as well, Kevin. So I guess my question is that having done all that, we still get resistance around the Let's Talk, and especially around the development plans. Our development plans are seen as a nice to have as an add-on to what the Let's Talk is, because we've sort of made the Let's Talk, hey, we're going to report back on your completion rates, and it's become a bit punitive in that respect. And then the development plans are on top of that. So I was just wondering if there were any ideas on how we sort of embed that development and how we actually sort of, whether you go all the way out and you say we're not going to have any sort of process, but at the same time wanting to make sure that we're having those conversations and we are actually logging them somewhere so they are actually at least documented.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we did with our approach is, well, the first one was that the documentation of the conversations and development plans is part of the employees' responsibility. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was that we, through the training of the employees, what we were also doing, as well as helping them to understand the approach, was to help them to understand what they should be getting from their manager in terms of what their manager should be doing for them. And creating the right environment whereby if they're not getting that from their manager, that can be kind of raised and sort of dealt with in the right way. We also ensured that the sort of recording of the conversation and the development goals could be as detailed or as light as the employee wanted. So effectively, all we're monitoring is did this conversation happen? Has the employee got some goals, and have they got development goals? We're not kind of monitoring anything else in terms of the quality or the detail of the conversation, because we wanted to put the emphasis on the conversation, not on the recording within the system. I think with the development plan piece, so we do track, as we said, if a manager feels an employee has developed. But I think it was more around creating that sort of excitement around it and getting employees to really want to have that development plan in place and managers to understand the value of that. And again, linking that to the talent management approach, to the succession planning approach and those kind of things to make sure there was that sort of complete link up. But also for leaders to be really clear in their communications, so people understand that development is an ongoing, continuous process, and everyone has development goals and everyone is focusing on something, and we should all continue to do that. So yes, I think it was a mixture of sort of behavioural changes, a bit of culture change, some monitoring from HR, but quite light touch, and creating an environment where employees basically demanded that they had the right conversations and got those development plans into place.
That'll help, Gareth.
Just very, very finally, sorry, hog everything, but do you use any of that for your then performance process? Because we find we have managers who don't want to mark people down, so they mark them as exceptional, and then 2 weeks later you're having a conversation about this person's not performing properly, and you go back and look at the appraisal and go, well, hang on, you've given them exceptional because you didn't want that hard conversation. So I guess we trip ourselves up by having a grading in that respect.
Exactly, yes, and we broadly just answer, has the employee delivered and have they developed in a broad sense, so that sort of helps with that. We do have sort of another sort of element within the system which isn't again used consistently, but every people manager has to have a people goal. Part of the success of their people goal is linked to their 360 feedback from their team, and technically if they don't meet their people goal then they won't get such a large increase, so pay increase, so we kind of use it in the opposite way to performance related pay, in terms of encouraging managers to meet the needs of their people in their team. But our kind of approach is that managers are there to serve their teams, and that is their primary focus and primary thing they should be supporting with. So
brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. And then moving to Hardeep, and please do raise your hand if you've like a question after Hardeep.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you to my three speakers. Really good to hear from you all. I guess my question is quite broad, really, but all three of you are at very differing points around the performance management piece. And it sounds really progressive and, very envious of where you guys have got to, because we are still following a very traditional performance management cycle and trying to move forward with that. But I guess and I guess the question is this approach, this kind of progressive approach to performance management, does it work in all industries and sectors? And the reason why I say that is because Save the Children, as an example, is very different from, say, investment houses and, investment banks and very, very, where there is things like balance sheet carry and people have a total comp structure in place and bonuses are a real driver. So how would this work in those types of environment compared to, I guess, an environment like Save the Children, which is hopefully you're recruiting different people that are driven by money?
Anyone see an example of that or tried that? Jen, it looked like you're going to come in, sorry.
I was just going to say, because I was trying to give you examples across multiple industries. Yeah. Admittedly, finance is probably and I would guess solicitors are pretty hardwired in time and money. I just bring it back to, making this human. So the conversations, it doesn't really matter if you have to keep the process, then you've got, as I said in my slide, you've got to do what's right for your environment and your industry. And you've got, you can be progressive, but you can go on a journey with them as well. And actually, if you just dial up how to have those really good conversations, and if that's all you can do in light of keeping a format, I still think you will grow engagement and have better results for your company's performance. But also I just encourage you to go with what's the root cause that you're trying to solve here as well, because a little bit to my point around, you can jump on the bandwagon and some companies ripped off ratings and now they're stacking them back in again. I think it's quite tempting to go, oh, look what everyone else is doing, shit, I better get on with it and do it too. But I think what you've got to do is figure out what's the root cause of a problem you've got at the moment, how can you make it more human, and also what do you need to kind of just evolve over time, would be my 3 bits of advice.
Okay, really helpful. Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
It's all right.
Thanks both. And then just bringing in Tracy.
Hello, thank you for your views. It's really, really interesting. We're at a point where we basically have I think it's quite a hard process. We used to have what's called forced distribution. I don't know if any of you, yes, some of you are nodding. We had that for a couple of years, and then we got a new CEO, and he came on board and said, no, we're not going to do that. Our staff hated it, but we still have elements of that. So we do leveling meetings every year, whereby we get managers in a room, and managers have to kind of bring evidence in that room with regards to scoring their staff. So they'll give their staff a provisional score, and then they have to justify to the rest of the management team why they've given them that score. And it's also linked to a bonus payment. So if, for example, manager says, right, I think my staff member is a 5, they have to justify why they're a 5. And then if the other managers disagree, then there's a bit of a challenge. And it's a horrible thing that happens every year, and everyone kind of dreads it. So we've come to a point this year, we've done it for probably the last four years. We've come to a point this year where we've agreed that it has to change. Everybody has agreed, and we are starting to ask our management team what they want. And I think we are going down more of a route that you described, Kevin, whereby we're going to just focus more on conversations. We're a not-for-profit like yourself. We're going to focus more on the sort of conversation side of things. But I suppose my question is, we have an issue around consistency at the moment. We've always had an issue around consistency with our management team. So how do you kind of ensure that the quality of those conversations are the same across that management team? And also, if there are any kind of poor performers across the business, how do you know that those managers aren't just going to have that conversation and say, yeah, great, fantastic, let's just move on? It's not linked to bonus anymore, because we're also thinking about removing that linkage to bonus. It's not linked to bonus. I don't really care. We'll just get this over and done with. Let's just forget about it. And then it kind of loses that element. So we're kind of worried that if we change it, it's gonna. That's kind of our worry. So how do you kind of ensure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think through our approach, that a lot of the, as I said, there was a lot of upfront emphasis and input around the sort of getting managers to buy into the philosophy of the approach, to understand the importance of the coaching conversation, to understand the importance of equity and fairness, because we know that that's a massive demotivator if you've got managers who are rating people against different standards or feeding back to them on their performance on different standards. That really does create issues. So I think we kind of invested quite heavily in that to start with. But I also think to some degree that the sort of problem that you're describing in terms of managers being inconsistent, or managers saying somebody's performing well and then 2 months later saying we want to put them on a performance improvement plan, for instance, is the problem is the same problem that's there regardless of the kind of system that you've got. And I think that you have to kind of focus on that coaching towards the managers from a HR perspective, in terms of them understanding the importance of this from the employee's perspective, in terms of development, in terms of career progression, in terms of sustainability of their team, happiness, engagement, all of those positive things, but also in terms of the implications of not doing it right and getting it wrong, of having performance issues that you can't then deal with because they haven't been dealt with before. So yes, I think it's that real mixture, but I haven't kind of got the answer to it. As I said, it kind of comes down to the success of the people managers and whether or not they really get this and they really understand what it takes to be a good people manager with that human connection and that human touch to their people. Which unfortunately we haven't got an answer to. But if I had the answer to that, I could retire probably at this point. So,
so true.
The implications of getting it wrong is a good one, because no managers want to go down a HR process route. So that's a good one.
Yeah.
And if I can add, so often with these conversations, we're trying to, there's so many different outputs that the business over time has come to expect. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about how we're delivering on what the team's there to do? Or are we having a career conversation? Or are we having a salary conversation? Or are we having a underperformance resolution conversation? Or are we having a bonus conversation? Or these are completely set. These are individual conversations, and each of them actually needs clarity behind it and the right skill set to step into that, because we've all had the situations where you can go one of two ways, can't you? You can mark everybody up because you're concerned that, well, otherwise I'll have to do those icky exit conversations, and if I lose the headcount, well, perhaps it might not be approved, and then I'd lose the person entirely. So better to have someone who's misfiring than no one at all. We have that going on in our organizations, or the other way round, when nobody wants to admit that they have top performers, because then they might go on some hypo program and be taken away from me, and actually my entire team's dependent on them. So you've got these amazing subcultures which actually reward people for fibbing to us. Isn't it fantastic?
That's a good point. And yes, thank you. That's a nice insight as well, and especially about the different skill sets needed for each conversation you're effectively having under one umbrella. Sorry to cut it short, so I'm going to bring things to a formal close now, but I suggest that we keep the call open for 5-10 minutes. So if people have a question that they haven't felt has been covered, stay on, and we can discuss it in the group. For people that need to go, fair enough. We'll send the link round to the YouTube channel later today. Keep sharing on the WhatsApp groups, but a big thank you to Jen, to Tim, to Kevin for sharing such insight and putting such care into it. We'll see you again, but stay on the call if you have more questions. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Tracy, if you're still there, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. Yes, it's just we're going through this at the moment, and we're just trying to decide what is the best approach for us as an organisation. So we're going to consult with our management team as well as staff to find that. So we're going through that at the moment, and then we're going to make a decision. But I think it is going to lean more towards the getting rid of definitely getting rid of the levelling meetings that we have at the moment, and getting rid of that link to pay. And going down a more quality of the conversation route, because that's what we feel is important, the quality of those conversations. But the kind of exec team and I have had chats about what we worry about, and it's about the consistency amongst managers. But no, that's really good points that you made. So thank you for that.
That's all right. The other thing I want to say to you as well is I think there's some radical thinking that's still to be done around bonus and the value of them, and I still think companies are very nervous about dropping that, because it doesn't look competitive if you're comparing your total package and you drop off the big fat percentage of extra earnings. And when I was doing my research, actually, that came in because I don't know whether it was an isolated, but certainly in the US, they changed some of their tax laws back in the 90s, which took away some of the need for salary over bonus, and they managed to switch it by pushing it into a bonus scheme. So I don't know if, again, we're just living with some legacy stuff of old, where actually I've kind of many times had conversations with managers going, do you know what, whether they get 10% or 5% doesn't make them work any harder. And it's a great opportunity for us to have a think about, where the value is in those conversations, and just thinking about it from a total reward package. But I totally saw the value of divorcing reward conversations from ratings. I mean, even if you just start there and get that working brilliantly, you're on a winner. I'd love to see if you can ditch the bonus scheme. That's a kind of out there thought for someone else another day.
I've seen those conversations where you're having that not the calibration, but where you're having challenges to different people's perceptions of viewpoints should be happening in the talent review process, not in the performance rating process. So yeah, I think that's kind of where you want to have that conversation, because that's all geared towards progression and development of your people. So therefore, it's a positive conversation, regardless of how difficult the challenge is. So yeah.
That's a nice thing on Tim's point. Oh,
and it only works if the definition of success of a leader is to grow and develop a team who perform, progress, spread their knowledge and influence across the organization. Whereas if the definition of success for a leader is about technical delivery, then we're in the situation where people will hide their talent, because not everybody, but we all know leaders who definitely do that, because it gives them an easy life. Whereas actually, to move people through and to have that responsibility for creating talent for the long-term sustained success of the organization, that's really what we should be asking our leaders to achieve first and foremost.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. And I just wanted to bring in Joe, if I may. Hello, Joe. Thanks, Tracy, by the way.
Hi all. Thanks very much. Really insightful conversation. And thank you for sharing your experiences. So I work in the professional services sector, and we've done everything. We've gone through every revolution of this. So we removed ratings. We've now brought ratings back. We even brought back forced distribution, and I've just removed forced distribution. And we're currently going through our interim process, and I've shifted the focus of interim onto the talent conversation. And so we use the 9-box grid at the moment for talent. We have 5 ratings, or performance zones as we call them, and your rating is hardwired into your total reward, and in the industry we're in, it's very much that reward piece is critical around performance. We also have a very hierarchical organisation, and it's very graded in terms of how you progress through, so there is lots of structure to it. However, our actual framework for performance management is all around exactly what you've just been talking about. It's around regular check-ins, it's around creating a feedback culture, it's around moving away from an exhaustive list of objectives to critical outcomes, etc., etc. We just simply haven't embedded it as the firm in the firm. That seems to be coming now as my task as to how to do that. And whilst we're going through our interim and talent review process just now, everyone wants to know what we're doing for year end, and so I need to think through that. But one of the key challenges we're facing is time. So we've got parts of the business that are 150% utilised. We have the structure of our firm means that your line manager is not necessarily your performance manager, because a large proportion of the firm are client facing, they're out on engagements, they work day to day with an engagement manager, but their performance manager is somebody different. They might not see that person for months on end. So I'd welcome any thoughts or experience around how do you create the time for the regular check-ins, and anything around upskilling performance managers, because our focus has historically been on technical training, not leadership and professional training, and I'm now trying to bring in leadership and professional training as a key focus. So anything around creating capacity for regular check-ins and upskilling performance managers, I would really welcome any guidance.
So one thing that I had a look at actually was the Project Oxygen work that Google did on line manager capability. Actually, I was doing a little bit of consulting last year and was asked to have a look at some values and so forth. And we realised that actually to embed quite a lot of stuff, you need to kind of fix that line manager. And I'm sorry, but it's in every company I've ever worked in. So, but they came out with almost a contracting scenario, which worked really well. Like, what should I expect from you as a line manager? But what am I supposed to do as a line manager? And I think there's almost an opportunity, if you want to embed it, to almost like what you're both signing up to, because you need that buy-in. And I just wonder if you then couple that with then the learning opportunity that goes with, and this is how we're going to help you get better at doing these conversations. There's a nice segue into that. That was going to be my kind of comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we kind of challenged managers quite a lot when we kind of implemented, because we also got the sort of pushback around, well, you know, that how am I going to find the time to be doing this? And it's kind of, and then even when you get to the end of the financial year and they say, well, I've got to focus on the budgets. I can't, you know. So we kind of challenge managers to say, well, why are the people in your team the least important of your priorities, and why are you not prioritising them before everything else? And so, yes, I think you have to kind of challenge that and challenge managers' perceptions of that. And as I said, also get employees to be in the mindset that this has to happen, and I'm expecting it to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I'm going to make sure it does happen. And I'm going to take control of it. So I think it's rebalancing as well. This isn't something which is done to you. This is something which you're part of and you're leading in your own right. And I think on the manager training, I would say that we focus much more on the behavioural side of the process versus the actual process and the technical side, in terms of giving managers, you know, a safe space to practice having coaching conversations, to practice receiving feedback, to know how to receive feedback in the right way. To know how to get the most out of their people through those conversations. So yeah, there's more focusing on that versus the sort of this is how the system should work. So yeah.
Great,
And,
thank you.
and just a thought, the whole idea that one person actually should rate any other one person is really odd anyway. You know, it completely dates back to, you know, we talk about line managers. Well, the language is about production lines. When you've got everybody in front of you, you're watching everybody do the same thing at pretty much the same time in the same way, and then you see who the most productive person is. It's not how any of our organizations work. You know, you're providing a service and interaction with multiple people. I mean, I've never seen this gone all the way, but I mean, you know, worth just reading the paper on organizational network analysis that Rob Cross wrote, not the Rob Cross that was here, the other one, you know, which is like, I don't know, 25 years ago. But you know, the way that that's evolved, because I mean, it's really fascinating to actually think about the way the web across an organization. What does the crowd say about that individual? I mean, that's, you know, in a very, very small way, that's what, you know, so many of the kudos style approaches that we're seeing on, you know, portals in multiple organizations. The Salesforce has a very good one. You know, to get those insights from across the crowd about what someone is appreciated for, why they're appreciated, do they deliver on time, do they step up when someone else, and a manager can't be in all of those conversations. So that for me is where we're going, and I think there'll be an awful lot of tech work in be it on apps or portals or whatever that will get ahead of us in that, so that we really bring multiple perspectives in as to how someone's valued with the team that they enable to perform.
Oh, it's nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Glimpse of the future there. One last question, perhaps from Matt.
Yeah, it sort of probably links a bit with Joanne's really, but one of the things we're working on is a sort of cultural underpinning where everyone takes personal responsibility. And Jen, you talked about theory X, theory Y. I quite like the old theories, and I'm a fan of transactional analysis as well. And I think certainly when I joined my organisation, everyone had this look up mentality. It was, you know, the person above them must have all the answers. And we're trying to drive complete ownership of, I suppose, individual contribution. And I think all three of you mentioned we're not calling it performance as such. It's more about conversation. It's more about development. It's about future talent. I suppose my question is, how do you, or what sort of tactics have you deployed to encourage ownership from all? Because again, all of you mentioned it's not an HR job, and equally it's not just the line manager's job, because, you know, what right does a line manager, as you say, Tim, have to determine someone's future? And I suppose the other thing that's fascinating is there's a lot of science behind regular one-to-ones and a lot of data surrounding regular one-to-ones have a positive impact on mental health. And so there's another reason why I'm very much pushing that ownership for all. So I suppose that was the question. What tactics have you deployed to encourage full ownership?
Yeah, I mean, some of, I mean, I'll talk about taxes because we're just literally on that journey. I mean, some of it is about being really clear about the accountability for each one. So I almost kind of used a bit of this is the manager's role, this is your role, and this is what HR do, and almost kind of explain in a nice racy type of way, but very simply, who's leading which bit of the process. So we've tried to, I mean, we had it quite old fashioned, so very paper based. Line managers told the employees what their objectives were going to be. So I think it's just almost kind of clarifying who's doing which piece of the process. But also I think our role is quite one of coaching and development, but helping both. I think sometimes a miss is that we go down the process line without educating or developing our people as to, well, how do I have that conversation? And Lucy, I was looking at some of Lucy Adams stuff, and she's created this like little toolkit of great questions for both for leaders and also people to be asking. So they're individually written, but it just gives you that kind of steer of how to go about that and do it. And I do think it's like this ongoing journey. Like we just, you know, we don't get it right for, I would say it took 2-3 years to get it right in a chocolate company. So it doesn't happen instantly, and that culture shift is one of patience and time, and it's really quick to go, we'll trap that process out and try another one because that one didn't work. I think you just got to give it that space and time to embed and not be the police of it. That would be my other sense of where we've gone wrong in the past, actually. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, yeah, good.
I think the other thing, one of our learnings, which we didn't do, which we should have done, is to use the sort of success stories to leverage and to get sort of more positive feelings behind the approach. So yeah, so what in hindsight, what we should have done is found out where it was working really well in the organisation, got some videos from some managers and employees to say, well, what's been the impact of this on me and my team, my development and my progression, and actually using that in the employee's own voice to drive up the sort of passion for employees to actually want to do this. Because to some degree, it can feel like the organisation is telling you this is going to be great, and we keep telling you it's going to be great, and because we're telling you it's going to be great, it will be great. Whereas people want to hear it for themselves, and they want to hear it from people like them. So yeah.
That's a very nice point, Kevin. I like that. Well, I think we better bring it to the close because I'm grateful to you all for staying on. And just to note Tracy's point, if you have any recommendations for a 360 tool, drop us a line and I'll connect you to Tracy. Tracy may be one for the WhatsApp group, of course, as well. Feel free to post. But thanks to the speakers. Thanks to all of you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.